Do you want to know how to teach a child not to touch something? I'm Nicholeen Peck, and I teach parenting and good communication all over the world through the lens of the principle self-government. And in this video, we're going to be talking about teaching children some self-control. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about what self-government is and how that relates to self-control in children. We're going to teach you how to teach your child about boundaries and how to teach them to give themselves a no answer when they want to touch something. This should be simple yet effective. I think every parent can empathize with the parent who has a child who touches what they shouldn't touch, right? They walk into a new environment and, oh, that's so pretty, and they go straight at it, that shiny thing that can break so easily. And the worst is sometimes even when it does break so easily. I'm so grateful to my mother-in-law. She was really great at teaching boundaries to my children. So our family was the last family to have children on my husband's side of the family. So all of his siblings had their children long before we did. So by the time our children came along, the grandparents were very seasoned at how to have grandchildren over to their house and how to keep all the pretty things pretty and not have anything destroyed. So she had some little cue phrases that she taught my children, and some of those cue phrases were as simple as, oh, pretty, pretty. When something is pretty, pretty, we don't touch it. We just look at it. Here, Grandma will look at the pretty, pretty with you. And so she would practice looking at it and not touching with the children. And I just remember watching her with my oldest child and thinking, I love that. I love seeing that deliberate training that is happening. She knows they want to touch it. She acknowledges that, but she tells them, even though you want to, we don't. There's a word cue that I'm going to give you. The word cue is pretty. Anything that is pretty, pretty, we don't touch. And she just chose that. We went with it. And honestly, every single one of my children, when they were babies and toddlers, heard pretty, pretty, because it worked at Grandma's house, so we were going to have it work everywhere. And so but you could use a different term if you wanted to. We taught them like she taught. Now, what I did not put together at the time when they were really tiny, especially with my oldest one, but I didn't put together that this was the same steps technically to a skill that he was going to be able to use for his entire life. She didn't break down skill steps for him. I did later as I taught the children even more information about accepting no answers, not crossing over boundary lines, so basically not touching things that we shouldn't touch. So being able to tell yourself no and to follow your own instruction for a no answer is a sign of self-government. How do our children learn to tell themselves no? Well, by hearing no answers from us and accepting no first from us. Then they think to themselves later as they mature, oh, I better tell myself no on that. That's a no. I cannot do that. So let's talk a little bit about self-government. Self-government is a principle. That means it's broadly applicable. That means it applies to everyone and actually everything. That's how we know it's a principle. The principle basically means, in the context we're using it here, that you have an understanding of the cause and effect of every given situation, and you possess a knowledge of your own behaviors so that you can control them. So you are able to look at any situation and say, okay, now hold on a second. If I do this, what could happen? Is that what I want to have happen? Is that the type of person that I ought to be, right? And you make that deliberate plan going forward. Then you look at another option and say, well, what about this option? If I do that, what could happen? What would be my effects? And then you deliberately plan, what path am I going to take? What behavior do I choose to have? A person who is self-governing makes a lot of choices. And the parents of a child who is learning self-government acknowledge that the child does need to make choices, and sometimes there are positive consequences to the choices, and sometimes there are negative consequences to the choices, and it is up to the parent to follow through with those positive and negative consequences so that the child gets the opportunity to learn, analyze, and make better choices in the future. So let's talk about this accepting no answers skill. If you have already subscribed to this channel, then you know that accepting no answers is one of the 4 basic skills of self-government. This book here, Parenting a House United, which I wrote back in 2009 and then did a second edition in 2020, teaches a lot of the nuts and bolts for how to teach your children self-government. So this book here would teach how to accept no answers and all of the 4 basic skills. But also, I have these books. These 4 children's books each teach one of the 4 basic skills. These are so beneficial for children to help you do the teaching and to also reinforce the skills that you're wanting them to learn. If a person learns these 4 basic skills, that actually takes care of 99% of their behavioral problems. Now this book right here, Porter Earns a Quarter, is about my son Porter. These are actually all about my children, which is kind of fun. Porter Earns a Quarter is all about the skill accepting no answers and criticism. There are 4 steps to that skill. So let's talk about those 4 steps. Step number 1 is to look at the person or the situation. In the case of touching something that we shouldn't touch, it's a situation. So we look at the situation, ooh, I want to touch that. And we recognize I'm feeling a craving to touch that. You might have to describe with your child what that feels like when you want to touch something, when you want to grab something. There's a feeling that you have that gets you excited about that thing. Okay, you might have to practice that feeling a little bit. So that's recognizing the situation or looking at the situation. Oop, I have a feeling. I got to look at that situation. I want to touch that thing. Then step number 2 is to keep a calm face, voice, and body. So now I'm going to stay completely calm. I'm going to say to myself, it's okay. It's just a thing. I don't need to get too excited. Let's get calm. This is basically a moment to stop and think for just a brief second so that you can choose instead of just give into an impulse. Step number 3 in the skill is to say okay, but that suggests that first you have given yourself the no answer. So you might want to insert an optional 5th skill or 5th step, I guess, in there where you tell yourself no. No, don't touch it. Then you use that step number 3, which is to say, okay. I'm telling myself, okay, I'm not touching it. Then step number 4 is to drop the subject. That means you don't think about it, talk about it, or do anything with it anymore. You just walk away from the situation. You leave it behind. That's what it means to drop the subject. When you can accept a no answer, you can do all 4 of those things. Look at the situation or the person, keep a calm face, voice, and body, say okay, or you could disagree appropriately if you're using the skill with another person. And because if you wanted to touch it, but someone else is telling you no, you might disagree appropriately with them about it. And that's a whole other skill. We're not going to teach that in this video. That'll be for another time. And then you drop the subject so you don't talk about it anymore. Now let me just tell you, I taught all of my children how to stop touching things that they should not touch just by using that one skill. Accepting a no answer was that transformational for them. I didn't have to put up all of my fragile things and put covers and locks on everything all the time. Sure, when they were a little baby and toddler and they didn't fully understand yet, maybe I did a little bit of that. A couple of those cupboard locks or something. But most of the time, they would ask me about things. They would look at me and like, oh, is this okay? And I would say, oh, that's a no answer. And they would go, okay. And then they would walk away from it. Or they might say, appropriately? Like disagree appropriately? That's how my 2-year-old granddaughter Clara says it right now. She goes, properly, because she wants to disagree appropriately. So sometimes we would talk about it. Sometimes the answer would be yes, but sometimes the answer would still be no. And then they could walk away and not think about it again. They were okay. Now sometimes, maybe as they were learning the skill, did they still whine a little bit? Did they get upset because they couldn't have it a little bit? Yes. But please don't forget you're the parent. And sometimes the parent disappoints their child by giving them a no answer. That's your job. Not that we want to disappoint them all the time, but that is what your role is. You're the person that's supposed to teach them their boundaries, teach them safety, tell them no, and how to actually accept that no. You've got to give them that opportunity, which means you can't take it personally if they cry or whine. But you may be asking yourself, but what do I do if they do cry or whine, or if they go ahead and just take it anyway? What do I do? Well, I can help you with that. In fact, this whole channel is dedicated to teaching your children about self-government, and so is my website, which is teachingselfgovernment.com. There is a video on this channel that will give you a little sneak peek into some of the skills, how they all work together, and what you can learn about self-government. So I highly recommend watching the full-length class here on this channel called The Not-So-Known Secret for Parenting Success. Click on the link to that video now, and you'll learn a lot more to help your family. I'll see you there.